Hi, I'm Ian and welcome back to Astro Time Traveller. This is the second episode of 3 showing you how I planned, processed a mosaic and then processed the image from that of the Horsehead Nebula and M42. This is the second of those episodes. In the first one I showed you how I planned it and used my ASI AIR Pro to capture the images. In this episode I'm going to show you how I use a number of tools to actually put the mosaic together. I use Image Composite Editor, a Microsoft tool, which is my preferred tool because it does a fantastic job just on the images that come straight out of Deep Sky Stacker before you've had to do any stretching at all. And then you can use the resultant image straight into PixInsight and then start your linear or non-linear work. But I'm also going to show you how you can create that mosaic within PixInsight, a slightly longer method, but also how you can do it in Photoshop. Both of those require you to do some work on the images before you actually start creating the mosaic from it. But I'll show you how that works. Although for the Photoshop, it didn't actually work on my Horsehead and Orion image. So I've done one on M31 to show you what that looks like. And then in the final of these series, I will then show you how I actually process that image through PixInsight and Photoshop. So stay tuned and hopefully there'll be some elements that you can find interesting in how I do that here. So the first example I'm going to use is the Image Composite Editor. So this is a kind of Microsoft tool. So if we just go into the tool, which is down on the bottom of my toolbar, let's load it up. Let's fully expand it. So Image Composite Editor, you can download it from a number of places, I believe still. I downloaded it only 2-3 months ago. So you click on 2 images. So I've got my 2 images that I took, the Horsehead and Orion. You can have either a simple panorama or you can do more complex. I'm just using simple here because I've only got 2 images. So if you click on those 2 images and then you just go to Stitch, it then just stitches them. Now these are straight out of Deep Sky Stacker, so there's no pseudo stretching, nothing at all, but it still manages to stitch them together, which I think is amazing. And I think it does a pretty good job at stitching. Now clearly the images may be different in their definitions, in their quality, but you then have 2 images stitched together. And then the next process is to crop them. You can change and look at the size if you want, but here obviously you don't see anything because you've got an unstretched image. So you're just seeing the darkness that's come from that. So click on crop and then you go into the next stage. So it just prepares it for cropping and then you just use the tools to move to how you want to crop the image. Now I wanted a widescreen view of the Orion Nebula and the Horsehead, so that's exactly what I wanted. I can do more cropping when I actually put it into PixInsight. So I'm ready now to complete that. So it does that and then it's ready to export. So I save it as a TIFF file because that's what I'll want to use in PixInsight. And then I'll save it in the same location that I had the 2 original files. And I'll just name it. So M42-IC434 and I'll call it stitched. Because it's in the past. Let's just get the capitals on this. So it takes a couple of seconds. Sorry about that. M42-IC434. The data, I took it and stitched and then save. And it will then save it. And again, it just takes a few seconds to save it. So the whole process of putting that mosaic together has taken, 90 seconds? Something like that. So that's pretty good. Now what I can do is I can go across into PixInsight and let's just open up that image so we can see initially what it looks like. So it's here my examples, there's the 2 images and here's there's the now stitched combined image. So let's just open that up. We'll take a few seconds to open it. It's quite a big file because I drizzled both of the images. And now let's just center that and then let's just do a stretch to see what we've got. And here it comes, takes a few seconds, and there we are. Wow, so I've got Orion on the right-hand side and the Horsehead on the left. Just what I wanted. And if you look through it, you can see there's actually a bit of definition between the 2, and that's obviously because I had very little data on the Horsehead Nebula, only 6 images, so I think only 18 minutes of data. whereas on the Orion I've got a lot more. But actually where it stitched it is really good. And when I've done it with images that are comparable in terms of how much image time I've had, integration time, you can't see the join. It really does look very good. So I'm really impressed with this, and this is the kind of tool that I go to rather than the other two that I'm going to show you, because it's so quick to do and it does it, I think, really, really well. So now let's move on to PixInsight. And I've really got into this by looking at two videos recently, one by Amy of Amy Astros and another one by Nick at Windy City Astrophotography. So here you can see I've opened two images. So here's the first one, which was the Horsehead. So I'm just stretching those so we can see them in PixInsight. And here's the Orion Nebula. And what I'm going to use is just a bit of dynamic background extraction. So I'm just going to speed through this fairly quickly. So I've done other videos where I've used this tool, and I've either often had all the squares just around the outside, or I put all the squares across the image, but obviously not where the nebulosity is. So we'll just do that quickly on the Orion Nebula, and then we'll fast forward and do the same and just re-stretch it. There we go. So that doesn't look too bad. And then let's do it on the Horsehead Nebula. So again, taking them off the nebulosity and just making sure we've got some away from that, and see how that goes, just to put a bit of that into how we deal with background extraction. So I think that's okay, ready to go. So we'll just do that. And we need that to start with, so we've got the images at a starting point. Now I probably should have done linear fit as well. I didn't in this example, and you'll see that impacts the image later on probably. But also the image is impacted by the low integration I had. So now go into all processes and go down to star alignment. So this is the tool we're going to use to align. This takes a little while to do, so I'm going to go through each of the steps, but we mostly use the top box here. And the thing we want to watch out for in particular is what we want to set as the registration mode. So we need to change that to thin plate spines. We can tick distortion correction. And then in the working mode, we want to move that from the register match to the register union mosaic. And those are two essential to start with. We'll change one of those a bit later on. But in the first part of this process, that's what we need to do. And we also probably need to click frame adaptation. So if we just click on to that. And then if we go down, the rest can be left pretty much as is, other than star matching. And in the tolerance, it starts at a 2, but you probably want to move that up to something like 8, just to give it the maximum opportunity to kind of make sure it's matching stars together. And then we're kind of ready to go, other than we do need a reference image. So let's use the Horsehead. So we move that across and put that as the very top, the reference image. And now all we need to do is kind of take the triangle and put it onto the Orion Nebula, and then it will go off and it will create a kind of a template for the mosaic that we're going to do. So it takes a few seconds to do that, but here it is. So if we now just have a look at this, we'll just move the working module out of the way. And if we just stretch this, what we'll see is what it's going to try and do to actually put the mosaic together. But this is kind of a rough cut of that. Now, firstly, you can see the images are very different because of the integration time and because I didn't do linear fit, but it has actually stitched them together. And like you saw in the earlier version of using ICE, we're going to have to crop at the top to get a single frame out of this. But anyway, that's our starting point. So now what we can do is we now use this as our reference. So we move across and take this created mosaic as our reference image. And now all we're going to do really is apply that to the other images. First thing we need to do though is go back and change the working mode to register match images. And then we're ready to go. So if I just move that out the way, what I can do is apply this to the Horsehead and then to the Orion Nebula. So just take the triangle, put it onto the Horsehead Nebula, and again it will go off and work on that, and then it will come back. It doesn't take too long, takes a few seconds, and I'm just going to shorten that here and bring it back, move ahead. So here's the image. Now if we stretch that, we can see we'll have the left-hand side, the Horsehead Nebula in there. And that actually looks already better than obviously the early version, because that is now what we're going to actually use when we do stitch the two images together for the mosaic. So that's good. So that's done on the Horsehead. Now we move across and we can do on the Orion Nebula. So again, take the triangle, put that onto the nebula, and it will go off and do that process as well. And again, it takes a few seconds to do that. I can't remember how many, but not as quickly as I'm showing here. I'm just jumping ahead. And once we've done that, you'll see that the image will come up. And it's just taking a few seconds. Here it comes almost. There we go. And now what we can do is, again, we'll stretch that. And we can see that we've now got the right-hand side. Hopefully, there we go. And we can see how different the actual images are between the two because of the integration time and not doing linear fit. But that's the two images. Now I'm just going to move them around quickly. We'll jump ahead here because I can close the earlier images down. I can close down everything I need. Let's just put these two images side by side, and then I need to save these images. So before I can do the actual mosaic together, I need to save them. So it comes up as registered. I'm just going to call it P1 for pane 1 for the Horsehead side of it. I'm going to save it as 16-bit. So we'll just do that quickly. And then likewise, I can do the same thing in a second or two on the Orion Nebula. So go into save it. It's registered. Let's call it P2 for pane 2. So we just click on that. And again, I'll save it as 16-bit. I think you can save it as higher bits. But it might be worth looking at Amy's and Nick's videos because they go into this in a bit more detail. I'm going through this fairly quickly. But now we're kind of done, and now we're ready to go into the next stage. So all processes, and we need to go to Gradient Merge Mosaic. So this is the tool that's actually going to stitch these two images together. So obviously the first thing we need to do is now add in the two saved images. So I'm just going down to where I save them. And there we can see, yep, there's the P1. So I'm going to save that image, and at the same time I can also go across and save the P2. So we'll just open those two images up. There they are. Everything on here you can leave really as it's set in the preset. If you do have any issues, you could perhaps change the shrink radius and the feathering radius. But on this image, I think it's going to work just as it's set. So now what we need to do is kind of select the images. So if we go up to the two images that we've got here, probably select all, and then we're just about to do that. There we go, and then we just click on go, click the round circle, and it will stitch the two images together. And in a second we'll see that come up. And this takes the longest of all of them to do. It takes quite a while, but obviously it's quite a bit of processing to do that. So here is that image. So now we can stretch that. And if we have a look, we can see the image. It's just about to, there we go. So you can see the difference in quality between the integration time, as I've said all along, on the Horsehead versus what I had on the Orion Nebula. And therefore you can see the kind of join. But we can now work on this, and we can do some processing to improve that however we want to. But obviously best thing to do is now just save that image. So if we go down and just call it M42 /IC434 and leave it as probably merge mosaic, we've then got the saved image. And again, this time I'm going to probably save it at a higher bit, so because I'm going to work on it in PixInsight. And that's it. So it's a tool. It takes longer than the ICE and it takes longer than Photoshop. But it's a really worthwhile tool, and I'm going to experiment to do more images with it soon. So now let's move into Photoshop. I used this a long time ago doing a moon mosaic, but recently I saw Pat on Heavenly Backyard Astronomy do a Photoshop. So that got me back into doing it. So if you go into Photoshop, you need to go into the File, and you need to go down to Automate and go down to Photo Merge. And then that will bring up the tool that we're going to use. It's a pretty simple process, and all you need to do really is copy in the images you want to use. So unfortunately my Horsehead and Orion didn't work with this, so I'm going to use an old Andromeda, an M31. So here's the left-hand side of the two images I took of Andromeda, and then let's go in and do the right-hand side. So that's it. And then if you actually look at the tool, You don't really need to do anything with the presets. You can leave them as they are. Automatic is what I'm going to use. I don't need to use any of these others. And then that's it. All you then really need to do is click and away it goes. So I was disappointed that the Horsehead and Orion didn't work, but I think it was because the Horsehead was so noisy and it wasn't able to really do that image work on it. But it worked well here with the Andromeda galaxy, which obviously has been stretched and a bit of work has already been pre-done on it. So I think that's something with the Photoshop methodology. You have to have an image that's been worked on. So you may have done some background extraction, some noise reduction already before you have your separate images to then merge. But you can see it's done it fairly quickly, and this is the merged image. So now all we really need to do is probably a bit of cropping. So we'll just go around the edges to crop in the image. And then we'll be ready to go on and do further processing with it, either back in PixInsight or Photoshop. So it's pretty impressive, particularly the speed compared to the PixInsight. We'll have a look at a minute at all three different methods and see what the results were from what I've done. But I was quite impressed with the speed of this. So again, I'll just go back and save the image. So we'll save this. It comes up as a panorama, so we'll save it as M31 and not M30, not M42. It's M31, and then we've got an image ready. So I was happy with that. So I'm going to try and experiment and do more of my mosaics using Photoshop and see how it goes. So here's all three images using the different mosaic methods from the ICE, the PixInsight, and Photoshop. And you can see the ICE has a lot more stars showing. And remember, nothing has been processed in this. So all I've done is just stretch it when I'm showing it here. And with the PixInsight and the Photoshop, there has been a bit of work done. So I did some background extraction on both of those before I stretched to stretch the image before I used them. So I'm really impressed with the ICE. And when you go in to look at the center of the galaxy, Andromeda, you can see that's pretty good in each of the images. So I think it comes down to your kind of personal choice and experimenting and trying these out on different images and see what works well and what doesn't work well. You can see in each of those the actual lines that you can see in the galaxy are pretty good. And remember, on the ICE, I've done no work on it, so I've got lots to do. And then if you look at where the join is between the two images, you can't really see much on the ICE. You can see a little bit on the PixInsight, but remember, I don't think I did a linear fit there, so that's partly the reason you get that. And I don't really see much on the Photoshop one, so I think that's done it pretty well as well. So you've got three different methods there to use, and hopefully this video has been helpful to show you how you can do each of those methods, and you can see which one perhaps suits each of the images that you do. Now, if I'm just going in a little bit closer here to look at the actual star field and to see if there's any difference, and I'm trying to do it where the star field crosses over between the two images, and you can see a little bit of difference between the two on the Photoshop and the PixInsight, but again, that could be because of the linear fit. But the reason I like the ICE in particular is because everything is done before any work. So you do it when a completely, effectively a black screen straight out of stacking, and I use Deep Sky Stacker, and you use it from that, and then it allows you to do all the processing on a single image rather than having to do some processing and then combining the images partly processed. So I use ICE all of the time, and I haven't really found a problem with that. I found it worked really, really well. And you can see in here there's a bit of noise difference between each of the images, and that's again because the ICE has had no noise reduction done on it. And what I'll show you in the next video is how I'm going to process the Horsehead and the Orion Nebula, that widescreen image, and I'm going to use the ICE version because that works from scratch without any pre-processing, and we'll see how I can use that for processing and getting a final image. But if you look at these ones for Andromeda, I think they all look pretty good, so it's down to your personal choice. So experiment, try them out, and see which one you like and which one you think works effectively for either a nebula or for a galaxy, and which one is best suited for your imaging. Come back to part 3 and I'll show you how I process to get one of these images using Star Exterminator and also Topaz Denoise.